All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Ask Me the International Mind, Brain, and Education Ask Me Anything series. And just a little bit of information. We are the International Mind, Brain, and Education Trainee Board. We're the ones that host these Ask Me Anything series so that we can reach as wide of an audience as possible in bridging cognitive neuroscience, education, and policy that's related to education. And we work really hard to bring speakers in the area and learn as much as possible from them. So thank you so much, Sandra, for joining us. And first, I wanted to share about our upcoming conference. So the IMBIS 2024 conference is coming up July 10th to the 12th. And at the pre-conference and in the main conference, we have really exciting symposia on bridging education, research, and policy. So we really hope to see you there. Please do register as soon as you can if you hope to come, and do contact us if you have any questions. For this Ask Me Anything series webinar, we have currently ASL interpreters. If this is something that might be helpful to you, please do make sure that you use the channel option on your Zoom. And if you have questions about how to get to that, please do write in the chat, and Sarah, my colleague, will help you. And finally, to more formally introduce myself, I'm Sylvia, and I'm the IMBIS Trainee Board, or I'm one of the IMBIS Trainee Board co-presidents. Chris Simmers is our other co-president, who is away getting married. Congratulations, Chris. And Sarah, yeah, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gilmore. I am the IMBIS Trainee Board Policy and Practice Chair. I'm doing my PhD in Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Connecticut, and was a teacher for 15 years before that. It's lovely to meet everybody.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, and finally, for our exciting speaker, Dr. Sandra van Aalderen is from Saxion University of Applied Science in the Netherlands. She's a cognitive neuroscientist by training and added to her career teacher education along with continuing research. Her aim is to provide insight into the mechanisms of learning to all teachers from all levels. And she believes that when teachers have more insight into cognitive and motivational factors contributing to learning, they're much more able to effectively teach students and experience much more joy in their teaching experiences. So yeah, and then Sandra also meets and works with teachers and teams from elementary schools, secondary schools, university level, and she conducts research in the field of teacher professional development, and she's an author of many books in the area, so please do check out her books. And we will also have her email in the end to provide for you if you have any questions. And on to you, Sandra.
Thank you very much for inviting me. My books are all in Dutch, actually, so I don't know how helpful that is. I just realized. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to the IMBIS conference in July. So I'm looking very forward to that. And thank you for inviting me to this Ask Me Anything session. And so I prepared some slides to talk about this topic, or to give you my view on bridging the gap between neuroscience research and education, basically. So I hope it's kind of 15 minutes long, and then afterwards there's time for questions. And I will try to share my screen. Oh, that's a challenge. Desktop 1, let's see. I first have to give permission.
You're a co-host? Is it saying that it's not asking me for permission for you?
I think I'm a co-host. But it says Zoom may not be able to record the contents of your screen until it's quit.
That seems more like a settings issue, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, wait, maybe now it's gonna work.
There we go. I think
Yes. Let me just. Make it a little bit. Almost there. Thank you for your patience. Can you see the PowerPoints?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay, thank you. So of course I was planning to just give like a very brief presentation, but you know, working on the slides, it always you think about more information that you always want to share. But anyway, so the Ask Me Anything series, and well, I'm mainly focusing on the relevance of understanding learning mechanisms for teachers. And well, you already gave me such a nice introduction, Sylvia, but just a short overview of my career until now. So I after my studies in biological psychology, I did a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, mainly working on visual awareness with fMRI and MEG. And then after that, I started working for university education, and I kind of moved into a postdoc on educational psychology. And that was the point where I started working with teachers, and then teachers mainly from primary school. And what I noticed when I was giving courses or doing professional development with these teachers, that there was quite a difference in understanding when I spoke of the word learning and what they interpreted as learning. So there my curiosity was triggered, thinking, what do teachers actually know about learning, and how do they understand learning, and how is this affecting their teaching in the classroom? So, well, I've been working on that since I think 2009. And right now I'm doing more applied research and supporting educators and doing teacher professional development, mainly on the topics of cognition, learning and teaching, motivation, mindset, and self-regulation. So that's a little bit more about my background. And when starting this PowerPoint, I was thinking of a slide I made, I think like 10 years ago. It was this slide that you're seeing now. In which I want to show how, like, my vision on bridging the gap between cognitive neuroscience, which you see on the left, and teaching in the classroom. And what I noticed is that, oh, there you go. The teachers in the classroom and cognitive neuroscience, there's a very, very broad gap between these. And this is due to the kind of research that is being done, so the methods being used, but also the kind of research questions that are being asked. And so if you have any, like, if you gain results from cognitive neuroscience about the process of learning, these are very general findings usually. And so, for example, if you do research into executive functioning of children, like, you get fundamental knowledge about, for example, the development of the executive functioning. But on the other hand, teachers, they have this question about, okay, at what age can we start teaching, or depending on the planning of our students, you know, when can we have them plan and regulate by themselves? So they ask very different questions. And I think one kind of step in between is more the educational science. So, for example, if cognitive neuroscience can say something about the developmental trajectory of these executive functions, then educational science can start thinking about hypotheses of how to support students knowing what their kind of development is in executive functioning. And if they do studies on how we can translate this to education, then the next step is actually thinking how we can have these, like these general principles, how we can translate them to like all these million different contexts, students, contents that is being taught. So I think, there also needs to be like a, kind of like a step in between. One thing that I found very funny when I found this slide is that I put cognitive neuroscience on the left, kind of like at the start. And at that point, like 10 years ago, I think I felt more like a cognitive neuroscientist than a teacher educator. So if I would make this slide right now, I would always put teaching in the classroom on the left, because that's the start. That's the, the main goal when you want to improve education. But I didn't have time to change it for now. Anyway, so teaching in the classroom is where it should happen. So if we have more knowledge from cognitive neuroscience or educational science, somehow it has to end up in the classroom. And I think the way is through teacher education and teacher professional development. So I also want to start focusing on that, or taking the perspective from the teachers. So this is kind of like a typical classroom picture. And the teacher is very important. Well, we know from many, many studies that teacher is one of the most important factors in a child's learning. Now, and these teachers, they're standing in the classroom, and then they have to make like a million decisions a day on what they do, how they act, how they teach, and their thinking. If I look, well, at least in the Netherlands, you see that the teacher thinking and acting is mainly based on what they see in visual behavior or visual learning behavior in the classroom. So they see the behavior of a child, and then they react to it. They interpreted this behavior the best they can, and then they make a decision on how to act or react to the student. And most of the time, that's fine. But a lot of times, the visual behavior that you see doesn't tell you what's actually going on within the child and what a suitable solution is, or how to act. And for example, like a lot of children say that something is boring, but the word boring can actually have like 20 different meanings, from being too hard, being too easy, being, oh, I find this really, really uninteresting, to my cat has died this morning and I just don't want to do anything. I mean, like it can mean anything. So if you misinterpreted these visual behavioral signs, it can actually, happen that as a teacher, you make the wrong interpretations and actually have the wrong follow-up step or the wrong reaction. Now, and if this happens a lot, you can actually understand that the connection between what the teacher is aiming for and the learning of the student is not really, connected anymore. So if we look at the behavior of students in the classroom, well, we know from a lot of research that if you look at behavior, it's just partly influenced by conscious processes, and a lot is influenced by all kinds of unconscious processing that's going on. So we actually have to know more about where this behavior is coming from, so more on a cognition or biological level, to understand and to interpret the behavior that we're seeing in these kids. And behavior can be like just social behavior, but I'm mainly talking about learning behavior, so also like learning cognitive information. And what you would like for teachers to do if they is to base their thinking and acting more on this like invisible layer that is causing the visual behavior. Yeah. And that's where understanding mechanisms of learning can actually help a lot. So if we focus on the students and the student brain, we actually know that learning in school takes effort, or should take effort, because then learning is taking place. And Daniel Kahneman did a lot of research. He actually got a Nobel Prize for his work on thinking systems. And I just briefly want to talk you through this. He says that we all use two different systems of thinking. Yeah, we use them all the time, and kind of like intertwined and dynamically. So there's system one, thinking. That's kind of unconscious, it's automatic, fast. You use it for everyday decisions all the time, but it's also very prone to errors. So it's kind of like more stereotypical thinking is system one thinking. Well, the system one thinking doesn't take a lot of effort. But if you think about system two thinking, that's more complex thinking. It's conscious, it's slow, it takes a lot of effort, and you use it for more complex decisions or complex problems. And this is actually the type of thinking that we ask of students in schools, to deliberately think so that they can learn. So that's important to remember, that learning takes effort. So if we then focus more into the brain of the student, what is this learning? Well, if you ask a neuroscientist, you probably get such kind of like a definition. Learning is changing the organization of neural networks in the brain. So that is what has to happen. So every time you do something, I mean, if you listen to this presentation, something is changing in your brain. You know, don't necessarily have to learn anything, but even like the experience of being here is changing your brain. And if we then look at teaching, this is not I didn't think of this myself. This is the title of a book. It says teaching is the art of changing the brain. And that's kind of like an important, what do you say, of vision or realization to have as a teacher. You're influencing the brain of the children. So to get more into why teachers need to know about the mechanisms of learning. And the things that teachers usually learn, well, at least in the Netherlands, in their teacher educations, are teaching principles. And what are these teaching principles? These are things like space learning or interleaved learning, pairing words with graphics, managing cognitive load, retrieval practice, activating prior knowledge. These are all teaching principles that teachers learn in their education. And that's very important. But then these are general principles, and you cannot just take these principles and kind of copy them into your daily practice. So what teachers need to do is they have to apply these principles to their own context, to their own classroom, to their own subjects that they're teaching and their own students that they're teaching. And of course, this is nothing new. But if you think about this, and what has also been written in a lot of research papers, is that actually the applying or application or translating of these principles to your own context is very complex and is very difficult. There has been a study by the Education Endowment Foundation that puts it into words. So I'm just going to read it to you. Applying the principles of cognitive science is harder than knowing the principles, and one does not necessarily follow from the other. Principles do not determine specific teaching and learning strategies or approaches to implementation. Considering how cognitive science principles are implemented in the classroom is critical. So it's very hard to apply these and still have them be effective for learning. Furthermore, there's like a lot of factors that influence this application of these principles. Here's just like a few of these factors, probably there are even more. And just to highlight some of them, they go into the cognitive mechanisms that are related to learning. So, for example, working memory capacity, prior level of knowledge, so which is kind of long-term memory, motivation, learning behaviors or learning strategies, more emotional environment. So all these kinds of underlying mechanisms that are related to the mechanism of learning. So in order to apply these principles to your own teaching context, it helps if you have an understanding of how these learning mechanisms work, like on a more cognitive or even neurocognitive level, because it helps you in this translation and understanding what the kind of like the key concepts of these principles. So you know what makes them effective and what you can change in order to make it more suitable for your own context. And so what are important mechanisms to understand or theories to understand? Well, just a few to give you an idea. That these are like the theory of working memory and cognitive load, or how long-term memory processes work and information processing, or how knowledge is consolidated in knowledge schemes, or how feedback loops work within the brain. To give you an example of these kind of different levels of how to look at, bridging science and education. So for example, one learning principle, so I'm starting at this level of the general principles, is pairing words with graphics. We know that this is highly effective in education, but it's only effective when the information in both like words and graphics is congruent. And if you want to explain this further, you can go into working memory and long-term memory and kind of argue that the combination of graphics and words takes place in working memory, and it's related to the prior knowledge that you have. So if this information is congruent, it kind of relates to the same neural networks, and it will be consolidated in your memory easier or faster. So that's kind of like the underlying mechanism of how this works. So it does not mean that you should just include graphics or pictures to make it more fun. And that's a thing that you see very often. I've just one example, and it's in Dutch, but it's like from the musical notes, and they have this kind of joke under it with these two people, and like the joke doesn't have anything to do with the musical notes, and it's just kind of like distracting, trying to understand what the joke is. So this does not help combining words and graphics. So there is this teaching principle, pairing words and graphics, and there's the underlying mechanism, and that helps you in actually translating it to your own context as a teacher. Another example, and then I think I should stop talking, is on self-regulated learning, which is like a very big thing, at least in the Netherlands. And actually self-regulated learning in schools does not really exist. Well, first of all, because students have to go to school, they have to be there at a certain time, they have to be in a certain classroom at a certain time and do a certain subject. So there's not that much self-regulating actually going on. Furthermore, we know that self-regulation is related to executive functioning, but it's not the same thing. Executive functions, they are like a brain function, and they're not a skill. And executive functions develop until you're about like your 24th year. They are for large part genetically determined. And they cannot really be trained or taught because they're not a skill. They're a function that you use in order to obtain skills. And you can teach skills in school. So for example, the skill of planning. And some children get really good in making like a a plan for how to do a certain assignment, but actually executing this planning or this assignment, that's a different story, because it's more based on your executive functions. So actually also there, knowing about the brain or what executive functions actually are and how they function within the brain will help you translating this information to, for example, how you approach teaching self-regulatory skills to students. So to kind of like sum up, if you talk about bridging the gap between neuroscience and education, I think a major starting point is with teacher education and professional development. For them to understand, for example, new information coming from cognitive neuroscience and educational science and translating it to teaching in the classroom is complex. And I think that talking as a former cognitive neuroscientist, that as researchers, we could be much more aware about this complexity instead of thinking, oh, we have all this awesome information or knowledge. Here, teachers, do something with it or use this, because that's much more complex and there should be much more attention or resources going to this translation. Good. That was what I wanted to tell you. If you want to read more, or I have books that I'm really like a fan of, which is a book about lessons for learning. This highlights 12 really important teaching principles, which is really nice and really readable. And then these books that go more into the underlying mechanisms of cognition and the link to teaching. So that was my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandra. That was wonderful. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope everyone did as well. So for the next part, we open up the floor for anyone to ask any questions. We're going to record for another 15 minutes, and then we will turn off the recording, and you're more than welcome to stay a little bit, and then we'll let Sandra go because we've already kept her quite a long time. Yeah, so if you wanted to personally ask questions that aren't recorded, and you're more than welcome to also type in the chat. Yeah, does anyone have any questions that they would like to bring in? Okay, so I will bring in a few of our questions, and if anything comes up, feel free to bring them in. So we have a question from Sarah. Sarah, do you want to read your question, or would you like me to read it?
Well, I can do it. I was just waiting to see if anybody else had any. Hi, Sandra.
Hi.
It's so refreshing to hear you, especially as a cognitive scientist, talking about the kind of the impact of the teacher, because one of the huge frustrations for me in my kind of PhD studies as a former teacher who's been kind of in this cog-sci and educational neuroscience space has been there's this kind of attitude in a lot of the research that's very mechanistic, that sees like the teacher is almost like an inert delivery system for science, right? Like they do the science, we give it to the teacher, who's basically like a syringe, who like shoots it into the students and has no impact on the medicine in the middle, right? Which is just so clearly not accurate. And also like the context that this is all happening in is so important. And a lot of cognitive scientists and educational neuroscientists and educational psychologists really don't seem to have that foundation in actual education research about kind of teacher beliefs and buy-in and context and stuff. And I'm just really curious what you think is a way to try to change that, because I feel like until we start to have this, not just kind of teachers buying into the research, but researchers buying into teaching, that it's really hard to close the gap.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. And are you asking me if I have ideas how
I
to
do.
change
Yes, I want
the
your idea.
attitudes or the way we have to kind of incorporate teachers? Because well, it's hard to change researchers' attitude, I think. And because, well, I mean, that's with every vocational group, I think. You always kind of thinking in your own perspective, and that's the way you look at things. And but maybe we can also do some kind of professional development for researchers. And I don't know if they're interested in it, because I mean, one thing we could do, for example, on this like IMBES conference, is have a workshop or a course or something in which we talk to researchers and kind of make them think about what they're asking of teachers, and make them realize, or make them maybe experience how difficult this translation is. And there's a lot of research on this topic, and kind of like what you're saying is it's the application of theory model, or there's also this other name for it, and it's so clear that this is not working. No. So yeah,
I think it's this piece where by us interacting with whatever the intervention is or the idea, we change it, right? Because we interpret it, we apply it, our attitude towards it affects that kind of thing. And for example, a lot of the research around reading instruction and reading disabilities and science of reading, I have to read a lot of things, and you'd read an entire chapter, and teaching and teachers nowhere in the chapter, which is about how to improve teaching instruction. It's like, how do you change this massive blind spot where you're talking about instruction, but you don't see teachers as being relevant to that?
This reminds me of the medical system a little bit, where bedside manners for doctors was so important, because it's how you're communicating anything for your patient. But it actually wasn't taught in medicine until very recently. So I wonder if there is actually potential for neuroscientists to have this within their curriculum moving forward. Maybe that would be helpful.
I think Sonia has a question, and then Lavina, I'm sorry, I'm saying wrong. Lavina has a question in the chat also.
Hi, Sonia.
Hi, Sandra. Nice to see you again. It's good to see that you're continuing to work on this great topic. So thank you so much for that presentation. I remember you were the one who was really very able to put together what people were calling that, that impossible bridge between I think at the time was the neurosciences and I can't remember who wrote that infamous article. But then I remember you did such a good job explaining it, and you've done it again. So congratulations on that. So my question, so now I'm at UNESCO, and so at UNESCO, we work with governments and policymakers to improve learning outcomes. And so outside of wanting to improve teaching by looking at the cognitive neurosciences and the educational sciences, what policymakers can do from their end is to guide or make recommendations about issues related to curriculum or teacher training. And you talked a little bit about teacher training, which is, teachers really need to improve. Well, I mean, we need to improve how we train teachers. So professional development is important, and I completely agree. And this is just a broad question for thinking. I don't really have a question that can be answered. In the countries that we work with, which are mainly low and low middle income countries, some teachers are put to teach without any training because there's such a shortage of teachers. They're just put in the classroom. So that's one thing. So if we're thinking back to how learning happens, we're trying to then at some point they're given some training that they take either for 2 weeks during the summer, or they go on the weekend, or they do some training while they're also teaching. So if you're thinking back to this model, and it hasn't been working, and that's really because they're not able to build on any prior knowledge. So their foundational knowledge was not there in the first place, and we're expecting that going in with some professional development is going to do something, and it doesn't. So that's one challenge that is what we have to tackle with. And then the second one that we tackle, a challenge that we have to deal with, where we have to work with policymakers to understand this, and convince them that this needs to change. And then the second challenge is about the curriculum, which is decided at a national level. And so curriculum is another place where we could maybe change something in the curriculum to for teachers to, for the, I don't know what the teaching that teachers are doing in the classroom every day, the lesson plans that are provided to them, where they can be more informed from the science of learning. So, and I guess this is where maybe there is a question is, have you thought, or do you know how maybe we could use this knowledge from the cognitive neurosciences, or that are then tested in educational sciences, to change the curriculum that then teachers go in the classroom have to implement? So from the policymaker perspective, teachers are the implementers of the curriculum. So that's decided in countries that are not federated states like the US, or I don't know about Netherlands, where the curriculum is decided at a national level. It's just one curriculum for everybody. It's handed over to the different regions, the districts, the schools, and teachers just implement that curriculum. So is there anything we can do in that scope to improve what teachers do in the classroom? And I don't know if there's an answer. It's just a question. It's just your thoughts on it.
It's it's a really difficult question, because what I've been experiencing until now is that you can make curricula, and these are quite specific in what has to be taught. But the way that teachers then implement it, there's also always this variability in there, right? And the word implementation, there's kind of like the cruel pit, or how do you say that? The bottleneck. Because if they, like what I see a lot in the Netherlands, they have these teaching methods. We don't have like a national curricula, but a lot of teachers, like schools, buy these teaching methods for mathematics or languages, and they just kind of follow the method. Like they actually do not really think for themselves. They just follow the method. And that's a problem, because they just kind of think about what they have to do on their end during the lessons, but they don't really check what is actually being learned. And I think if you, so the more kind of you give or develop these curricula, I think the more the teachers are not being in there, do not feel agency to actually think about, okay, what I'm telling, or my instruction, or the assignments I have them do. If I do those, then it's okay. But they have to check what is actually being learned. So there's kind of like a risk, I think, in there. On the other hand, just to kind of come back on your what you told about the low income countries. So what I see in teacher education in the Netherlands is, especially for primary education, is that teachers are taught what they should do as a teacher. So it's kind of like didactical or like pedagogical principles or things they have to do, but they do not learn that, there's something should happen in the head of these students, because the learning is taking place there. And they have like this 4-year training just about, this is what I have to do. And then I can kind of, check, I did it, so it's fine. Okay, I did the whole chapter with the students, so it's fine. And the teacher doesn't know what is actually being learned by the students. And I think if you, as a teacher, you don't have any education, teacher education, maybe you're not that stuck in just following the method. So that could maybe be a benefit, that they're more kind of like interacting and checking what the student is learning. I don't know.
I don't know, the outcome scores are really poor,
Yeah.
at least in literacy and numeracy. So I mean, that's not the teacher. I mean, that's just the system. They never had a good education themselves. So like
Yeah.
I was saying,
Maybe
if
it's a knowledge problem or
it's a knowledge
a
problem.
structure.
Yeah. But thank you for the insights about curriculum. That's really interesting. I'll have to think some more about it.
Yeah, well, it's a complex,
Yeah.
yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Then it's always, I mean, it's always compared to what is happening there at the moment. So I mean, it could improve something, but maybe not, you have to make it as optimal as possible. Maybe not perfect.
Yeah.
Could
Yeah.
help. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
We have 2 more questions in the chat. Lovna, would you like to yeah.
Hello. Yeah, so your talk has been enlightening, I guess. For me, especially, I've been I just finished my PhD in education, and it's a lot of theory and a lot of pedagogical principles. And now I'm back to classroom teaching to children. So I'm going back to thinking about the perspective of teachers in the classroom, and
Great.
I was wondering that you mentioned that you were doing professional development for teachers, you were training teachers. I wonder what their reception is when you present these principles from or theories from cognitive neuroscience, because most of them, if they are trained in pedagogical principles, and we are as a trained teacher, we are taught to think in methodologies, right?
Yeah.
And also connected, my second question is, it's connected as well. Was there in your experience one particular common teaching method that has been proliferated all over the world, used in classrooms, and was disproven based on cognitive sciences?
And no pressure, Sandra, but if you can answer those questions within 2 minutes, so then we have to let the ASL interpreters go, but we can carry on talking.
So I have to wait a little bit?
No, I was saying we have to let their interpreters go in 2 minutes. So,
Oh, okay.
but you can carry on talking. It's just
Okay.
that we must say
Okay.
goodbye to them at 12:40.
Yeah. Well, if I'm doing this teacher professional development, actually the teachers, they're very very happy with the information I give them. But I have to say that, like, the teachers that come into my courses or education, they're highly motivated teachers, and they really want to make a change in their education. So that's a particular type of teacher, I think. But usually what I get back is that they say, well, we should have learned this like the first year in our teacher education. Why didn't we know this? This is so important. So I've been talking actually also to a couple of teacher-educator schools, and sometimes, or actually a lot, I hear from them, well, we don't want to bother the first year pre-service teachers with this information. It's too complex. We first teach them just how to manage a classroom, or how to, just teach the first math principles, for example. So they have a very different perception about this. And the second question was, if there's like a general teaching method. No, I don't really believe in that, but I do believe in these teaching principles. So there's been a couple of articles now. So for example, from the Education Endowment Foundation, but also this paper from Pomerantz. I don't remember, but they're somewhere in the slides, but also this book about lessons learned. They kind of state about 10 general principles that are very effective for learning if you apply them in an effective way. And I think you can apply them in all different kinds of teaching methods, visions, approaches, etc. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to our ASL interpreters.
Thank you.
We can say goodbye to our ASL interpreters, but we can carry on chatting if we have any more questions. How does that sound?
That's great.
I had a couple questions myself onto more, how can we, like, an additional part to bridging basically the science to the education. How can we bring the scientists more to the education world, in that they're also listening to educators to understand what they need and what they want to communicate to them rather than the other way around. What would you say to trainees in our area, so early career researchers, PhD students, research assistants, postdocs? How can they get involved? How can they include educators if they're not yet, I guess, if they haven't been taught or like given the professional development that you mentioned? Is there ways for them to reach out, or other than saying, come participate in my study?
Yeah.
They learn about the educators more.
I wanted to start with, that's a difficult question, but actually now, if I think about it, it actually might be very simple, because I think if I look back, what I wished I had done was just to kind of seek contact with a teacher in your, neighborhood school, or maybe a school you went to as, yourself as a student, and ask if you can just, attend a lessons for a day and just sit there and experience, for example.
Like classroom observations.
Yeah, just sit there and also just talk to teachers about why they do the things they do, so that you kind of get an insight into the thinking of teachers.
Yeah.
That's
That's really great. I mean, I would agree if the teachers allow them, but usually I don't. If they're a developmental scientist, they're usually DBS checked, or the safeguarding, so it should be okay, I think. It, as much as it would be if one would go in for research specifically, but rather than imposing your research questions, I guess I'm trying to go a step before the research question and really build our knowledge first of what's happening in the classroom, and then bringing out the research questions.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll have more of this at the INVIS pre-conference and the INVIS main conference. And I hope more people join us. And again, just a reminder for anyone watching this video to go ahead and register for the INVIS conference. And there will be some sessions recorded as well. So do get in touch with us if you have any questions about the conference or anything INVIS related. And we will be sending the recording out to those who registered. But I guess most people are gone, but we'll send out Sandra's email as well. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Sandra.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
You're welcome.